Hi there folks, welcome back to the IB and Andy Fishing channel. I hope you're doing really well. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to hit that little subs button. That way you'll be kept in touch with all the news, reviews, fishing and the other stuff that IB and I get up to. If you're a regular sub, thank you very much for joining us again, much appreciated. So one of the really cool things about running this channel is the amount of feedback we get through the comments section. And in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been more than ever. While I've been doing the small stream vlogs, you guys have been asking a huge amount of questions about the rig that I've been using. So I thought that rather than keep replying to the comment section, it'd be really handy if I just made a quick short vlog like this one to show you guys exactly how I rigged up and give you a few of the reasons why, because it's a pretty specific rig. It's probably not something you'd use on every river, but actually for small waters like that, particularly throwing nymphs in winter, it came in really handy. If any of you haven't seen those small stream vlogs, don't worry about it as long as you're fishing a smaller water. If you're wanting to fish it with nymphs and looking for a different way of presenting those, different way of rigging up, this will still be relevant, but it might be worth you checking out some of those small stream vlogs. So fishing a small water like that actually presented me with a few fairly unique problems. And in the first vlog, I went in just with one rod. I just went in with a traditional Euro nymphing rig, obviously scaled down slightly because I'm not expecting to fish 5, 6, 7 feet of water, so I scaled that down. Couple of flies, little braided mono indicator, and it worked okay, but I'll tell you what, I lost so many flies that day. You get a fairly unique problem on these small waters in that you're not going to be making big long presentations. So you need flies that are going to get down relatively quickly. You want those flies down in the drift, particularly in the winter, particularly when it's very cold like it has been. Those fish aren't going to be up in the water column. So you're not going to be making big drifts, but you need to get down quickly, which means you need quite heavy flies. Now, short drifts and heavy flies can be a bit of a problem if you can't quite get the weight right, or if the riverbed is a little bit up and down, because it means that you're probably going to be catching the bottom a lot. And that was definitely the case. I lost so many flies in that first session, and I actually said while I was fishing, do you know what, I wonder if I might be better off with a suspension nymphing technique here. So I went away from that first vlog, caught a few fish, did all right, but I was like, I wonder if there's a better way of doing this. I had a real scratch in my head and went away and tinkered around and actually came up with the rig that I fished in the previous 2 vlogs, the rig that you guys have been asking about in the comments section. So I'll go through this piece by piece, and the first piece, the obvious bit, we'll start with the hardware, is the rod. So I actually used my normal 10-foot 2 weight for this, and this was probably the bit, or one of the bits, that got the most amount of attention in the comment section. So a lot of people said, well, Andy, it's a tiny little stream, why would you use such a long rod? And that's a great question, and in truth, if I had an option for a slightly shorter rod, I think I'd have probably taken it. It still needs to be light. I know the fish in that stream aren't going to be massive, so I want a nice light rod so I'm not going to be bumping fish off. But the 10-footer, for most of the time, yeah, it was a bit too long. Had I have had a 9-foot or maybe a 9.5-foot 2 weight, that'd have been great. Do you know what? I wouldn't have wanted to have gone any shorter than that. And a lot of people said, why won't you use a 7-footer, a 7.5-footer or something like that, a real short rod? And there's a couple of reasons for that. First off, I knew I didn't want to use fly line. With it only being a very small stream, I knew I was going to have to get quite close to those fish to make presentations to them. Getting close to fish with a fly line can be a little bit problematic in a small water like that because they're going to be scared of it. The fix would be to use a long leader, but then you're making such short presentations that you're never actually going to get much fly line out of the tip to load the rod. I could just see a lot of reasons why actually using fly line in that situation wasn't the right thing to do. So I didn't. I went with a French leader, but I'll get onto that one. So having decided that I'm not going to use fly line, all of a sudden I don't have to worry quite so much about the length of the rod because I'm not going to be casting. I know with a longer rod, with a French leader, I can just do bow and arrows and short flips and stuff like that. So actually the length of rod wasn't so much of an issue. For the vast majority of the time the 10-footer was fine. There were a few instances where it was a bit long and I was clanging trees, particularly in the area I fished on the second day. On the third day it really wasn't a problem, it worked out absolutely fine. But I will say, yeah, if I had a 9-foot 1 weight or a 9-foot 2 weight, maybe 9.5, that would have been ideal. But to be honest, this worked pretty nicely. Also, in terms of the presentations, I knew I was going to be making a lot of bow and arrow casts. And obviously a bow and arrow cast, if I demonstrate here, is kind of limited to the length of your arms and the length of your rod. So let's take this rig for instance. I've got a 10-foot rod here that I've pretty much got the full length out of. And I can pull back to about here, so I've probably got 12 feet of tippet there that I can make a cast with, so about 22 feet of cast length in total. Let's dial that down a little bit. Let's say I went in with an 8-foot rod. All of a sudden I've got 8 foot there, perhaps 10 foot of line. So I've lost quite a lot of casting distance there by going for the short rod. A 7-footer, again, you get even shorter. So in terms of being able to make bow and arrow casts at reasonable distance, which I knew I was going to have to do in such a small overgrown river, again, the longer rod was actually a bit of an advantage. Don't get me wrong, when it was up here, I was clanging trees a little bit, but actually in terms of making presentations, and that's what a rod's for, making presentations, having that extra length on the bow and arrow cast was really important. That came in really handy. In terms of the stuff down at this end, the reel, any older reel would do for this. Obviously it's got a Nymph leader on it, so I've gone for something with a full cage. There's no fly line on this reel, it's just back in to a 9-metre French leader. In truth, at the distances I was working at, I could probably have just used straight 8 or 10 pound mono. It really wouldn't have mattered. I use this because it's what I've got, but if you're going to do this on a small stream and you don't want to go to the expense of buying a specific French leader for it, just use 30 feet of monofilament. It'll do exactly the same job. It'll work absolutely fine. One thing that did come up with the monofilament, and it was something I think I mentioned on the second vlog, is that actually it's quite important to keep it greased up. The other side, so on the rod tip side of your indicator, because at the point where this starts to sink, it affects the presentation of your indicator and actually can drag it under. So on the third day, I just took a pot of mucilin with me. Just kept this area here floating. It works absolutely fine. That was really important. There are instances where you need to mend this, reposition the line on the water sometimes, because you're not always holding it out. Obviously, coming down from that part of the rig, we've then got another fairly standout piece that, again, a lot of people talked about. In that to do this, I chose obviously a suspension nymphing rig, and I chose to do it with a foam indicator. And a lot of people said in the comment section, well, do you not fish the duo? Or some of the American guys said, do you not fish the hopper dropper? Yeah, I do fish those almost exclusively in the summer. I went into this, fishing in January and February, knowing the chances of me getting a take on a dry fly in January and February in, it was -3 some days, was basically zero. It wasn't going to happen. So I decided that rather than go for the kind of hedged bet of having the nymph and then a dry fly, go for the indicator that is the most buoyant, the most visible, the most sensitive, and the most reliable. So actually using this, which doesn't need any dressing at all, it doesn't need any floating, it's really buoyant foam, it worked really nicely. The other thing with that is it means that I can mount it on the French leader. Now, I did a video talking about a very, very similar rig to this actually before. I'll put a link to that in the comment section below. It's one of my favourite Grayling fishing rigs on bigger rivers. This differs slightly in that I'm not using fly line like I was in that one, but all I've done is apply the indicator and the float stops directly to the French leader, which means that from this area here that joins the French leader to the Tippet section, I've basically got infinite adjustability. Obviously I don't need that on a small river, but it means I can very, very quickly move this around, change the depth within seconds, and keep moving and keep fishing in the right spot. Because one thing I can tell you about those little rivers is that they are very up and down from pool to pool, so quite important to be able to change your depth. In terms of construction, the indicator is just 2 of the Full-in-Mill pinch-on strike indicators, pinched either side of a hook, which is hooked into one of them just to keep the whole thing together, just to make sure it doesn't fall apart while you're fishing with it. Actually, it's quite important that to use a little barbed hook, just get it stuck in the foam, and that way it doesn't fall apart. I have tried this without doing that, and eventually it does work apart, which is pretty frustrating. So down from there, with that French leader tip being 021mm thick, relatively thick by modern nymphing styles, it's not a thickness of line you'd usually use. I've realised that actually that could really affect the rate of the sink of the flies if I wasn't careful, particularly if I slide these further up here. Let's just move that up. All of a sudden, if I have to fish at 4 foot, which I was having to do, all of a sudden you've got this big long length of 021 monofilament. That's a lot. So for that reason, I actually chose to join the French leader to the Tippet section with a little micro swivel, just because it's going to add a little bit more weight. It actually just pulled down this section of monofilament. I watched this happening actually while I was fishing with it, and I wasn't sure how it was going to work in theory, but actually in practice it worked really nicely, because it meant that the flies could pretty much sink under their own steam, and by the time they'd got down, this had already sunk the monofilament up here. As I've discussed at the very start, the last thing you want to do is put really heavy flies on, because you're going to keep whacking the bottom, you're going to keep snagging up. So having this little micro swivel here with just enough weight to sink the French leader, for me was really, really important. That was an absolutely crucial part of the rig, particularly when I was having to fish slightly deeper. Coming down from there, I've got a stretch of about 2 feet, maybe just over 2 feet of 5X fluorocarbon. I use 5X here because it meant I could use slightly stronger tippet to the droppers on the flies. Obviously with hitting snags quite a lot and hitting trees quite a lot, if you go very delicate on the tippet down here, it means you're likely to lose more flies. There's a possibility you could damage the line and end up losing fish and stuff like that, which you don't want to do. The other thing is that I had a pretty strong feeling that these fish don't get fished for that much. I kind of thought they wouldn't be too tippet shy. So it's just over 2 feet of 5X there to a tippet ring, and I only ever fish 2 flies. On there at the moment there's a pink dub grub on the dropper and a deep purple on the point fly, but I varied those quite a lot. So having a tippet ring there, super quick to change the flies around. I actually much prefer this to tying water knots. I just find it so much more simple, so much faster and easier. And that, folks, is that. It's as simple as that. It really isn't a complicated rig. It's pretty straightforward. I had a few of the, it's not fly fishing comments or it's float fishing comments, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, I've said this before, but anyone who's willing to go out in the middle of winter in the freezing cold and stand in the river to try and catch grayling on flies, you fish however the hell you want, because every fish you catch you'll deserve, and it can be really difficult. I'm perfectly happy fishing like this. As I say, particularly in the small streams there, the challenge is often just getting into the water, getting to the flies in the right position. I'm not sure how I'd have managed to catch a lot of those fish on a different rig. I could possibly have used a Euro nymphing style technique a little bit more on day 3, but to be honest, I was quite enjoying playing with this. So that's pretty much it, folks. It's a pretty straightforward rig. There's a few components in there, there's a few moving parts, but reality is float stops, a couple of bits of foam, bit of tippets and tippet rings and a couple of flies, and you're absolutely away. Always when you're fishing those small rivers, in my opinion, the absolute key is being able to get the flies where you want them to go. It's more about getting in good positions and not spooking the fish than it is about anything particularly technical. Often these fish haven't seen flies or been fished for particularly, so just being able to get into those right positions, being able to get that rod in the nooks and crannies, learning to do that bow and arrow cast accurately particularly, I would suggest, and taking your time a little bit. I've guided clients on smaller waters before, and I think often the big mistake people make when they're fishing a small river is hurrying. You don't need to, these fish don't see a lot of flies, they're not going to be particularly fly selective, but you're not going to catch them if that rig's up in the tree behind you. So take your time, have a look around before you start fishing. More than anything, the important thing is to go out and try it. I know a lot of people are intimidated by the smaller waters because of the kind of enclosed nature of it. Once you've got used to it, once you've figured out that you can't rush and it's more about getting the flies in the right place than it is about anything particularly technical, it's really enjoyable. It's really lit the fire again for me, and I'm super excited going in towards the trout season now to go out and try this a little bit more on some dry flies, hopefully, when they start rising. On the subject of dry flies, actually, I went fishing a couple of days ago and saw my first hatch of the season. We had a beautiful day, nice sunny sky, early February, and all of a sudden large dark olives were lifting off. I even saw a few fish rise, so super exciting. It's just nice to get a little bit of a reminder at this time of year that even though it's cold and miserable, the flies are down there, the bugs are going to hatch, the trout are going to feed, and pretty soon it's going to be all about that. In the meantime though, folks, all I need to say is thank you very much for watching this vlog. Really hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you got something from it. Guys, if you try the rig, if you go out and fish this, please let me know in the comment section how you get on. I'm always interested to see how people get on, what people's interpretations of the stuff like the rig are, and let me know if you've made any changes. Again, I'm always an open book. I'm not saying this is perfect. There's many ways in which it isn't, but I found it worked really well. It was a good fix for the problem I had. And I think for a lot of people, this would be a good fix for going out and fishing some nymphs in small streams. Guys, I will see you again very soon for more fishing and stuff. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.